I believe we are live now. Okay, that's popped up. It still says it's bridging from my side, but I'm pretty sure it's live. Yep, okay, it's up. Okay, awesome. So we're just gonna wait here for a second and we'll start exactly at 1 p.m.
And just checking, Alvin, did you want me to start at 1 or did you want to go ahead?
You can kick it off at 1.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're so excited to talk to you guys today. This is going to be a really fun and exciting hour. We have a lot of phenomenal panelists here to talk to you guys about ethnic studies in California and how that's passing in the state legislature. And I'm just going to kick us off and we can get started. So, hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm one of the co-founders of Diversify Our Narrative, which is a nationwide initiative that pushes for diverse and anti-racist text in English classrooms. I co-founded it with my friend Jasmine, and we've been working with a really amazing team these past few weeks to push local school boards and ask them to implement better and more diverse literature, specifically in what they teach. And kind of the reason why we founded Dawn, as we like to abbreviate it, is because we really realized that with all the racial justice movements and the resurgence of that in this country these past few months, with all the protests in mind, that a lot of the books we read in the classroom do not adequately teach students about race. And education is such a powerful tool in this country because everyone has to essentially go through the school system. And we think that everyone, once they've graduated from compulsory education from K through 12, should leave with a basic and fundamental understanding of race in America because it is so important to learn about such topics. And so that's kind of the things we do. We work with a lot of local organizers who push their local school boards. So we focus a lot on the ground level. And we are really excited to be here in support of ethnic studies. And we really think it aligns super well with our mission and what we're trying to achieve in all of its end goals. And I'd like to pass it off to my co-founder, Jasmine, to talk more about that.
Hi, y'all. Nice to meet you all. My name's Jasmine. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and it's so great to have you all here. The mission of Diversify Our Narrative is super closely linked with ethnic studies and that we push for anti-racist and diverse texts in high school classrooms, as Caitlin said. And kind of just building upon this, why we feel like it's so important is it's just when we are in our schools, we are told that we are going to learn things that are important, quote unquote important. And so to not see ourselves and our stories reflected in the literature that's being given to us is going to have a toll on folks in terms of seeing their stories as unimportant. And so I know personally, when I was in high school, I did not really read any books by or about people of color, which is what Dawn's mission is trying to push forward. And we definitely see ethnic studies as an amazing step towards people being able to see themselves reflected in the history and the books and the literature that they read. So we are super proud to kind of be pushing for this bill, and we're so excited to have you all here today. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Alvin, who is the executive director of GENup.
Hey guys, my name is Alvin and I'm one of the co-founders and executive director of GENup. We are a California-based statewide youth-led organization and we focus primarily on engaging students in education advocacy and education policy in our diverse California education system. We have more than 80 chapters across California and we're involved in a whole host of issues, civic engagement, ethnic studies, what's happening right now, school funding, ballot measures, you name it, we get involved in it. And so this has really been an honor and it's been really exciting working with Diversify Our Narrative and March for Lives California around and supporting AB331, the wonderful bill that Assembly Member Medina, who is in this town hall today, authored. And it's been really exciting. We've been doing a lot of mobilizations around it and collectively in the last week, we were able to, we all started a petition that gathered more than 25,000 signatures for AB331, as well as making over 1,200 calls, as well as over 1,200 emails, as well as 400 plus calls to the Senate Appropriation Committee members. So students across California are super duper amped up for AB331 and really getting ethnic studies in California curriculum and California textbooks. So we're really excited. And on that note, I'm going to now pass it off to Yasmin, who is the one of the co-directors of March for Our Lives California, and she's going to speak a bit more on that.
Hey everybody, my name's Yasmin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm one of the co-state directors for March for Lives California. So March for Lives is a gun violence prevention organization. It was founded in 2018 after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, and it's since expanded to a chapter-based system across the country. So we're really excited to be here supporting AB 331. Part of fighting gun violence and promoting gun violence prevention is recognizing all the various intersections that have to do with gun violence. And those include different groups such as race, such as income, and different demographics such as that. And so we're really happy to be supporting a bill that helps educate students on our differences, which can help promote safer communities and acceptance for people of different backgrounds.
Okay, now we're going to get right into the town hall and discussion. To kick it off, we're going to have Assemblymember Medina, as well as Maya, who is the student member on the Instructional Quality Commission, speak a bit more about AB331 and kind of the overview of the campaign and legislation. So Maya, I'll hand it off to you and you can take it from here first.
All right, yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Maya Howard. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the student member for the Instructional Quality Commission, which is essentially the curriculum branch of the California Department of Education. And right now, the Instructional Quality Commission is getting a lot of attention because of the model ethnic studies curriculum that's being developed and reviewed. So basically this model curriculum, a bill came out in 2016 that requires this curriculum be developed. However, what AB 331 does is it requires that curriculum for ethnic studies actually be implemented in every school, whereas the bill that requires model curriculum to be developed doesn't actually require it be implemented. So a draft came out last year, and then a new draft came out this August 13th. So we have until November for the IQC, the Instructional Quality Commission, to review this draft and make revisions and then approve the draft. So in that time frame, what happens is the IQC listens to public comment and then discusses that public comment and different revisions for the draft. So I really recommend that all students who are invested in this ethnic studies campaign, who want to see ethnic studies in their school, read that draft and then go to the Instructional Quality Commission and speak about what you see in the draft that you like and what you don't like, so that when, and I say when because I truly believe that AB 331 will pass, when that passes, the model curriculum that schools are basing their ethnic studies on is the best that it can be. So I really recommend that everybody get involved in that as much as possible. And I will pass it on to Assemblymember Medina to talk more about AB 331.
Well, thank you, Maya, and thank you all. Thank you, Alvin, and to all the student leaders on this town hall. So I had a list here of some guiding questions that you submitted to me. So I'll start that way and we'll go from there. So the first question is, what inspired me to write AB 331? And so I'll share that I was an ethnic studies teacher. I was a Chicano studies teacher here in Riverside at Poly High School. And it was there that I saw the power of, as Jasmine spoke, when students see themselves included in curriculum, how powerful that is. And unfortunately, for too long, as many of you know and have experienced, that our public school education does not reflect everyone. And it is, by and large, an ethnocentric, Eurocentric curriculum. And so my experience in the classroom, my experience in seeing how students become empowered when they do see themselves in the curriculum, that and just an overall scene of ignorance of people, even leaders, their own ignorance, and making statements that are sometimes outlandish that shows that ignorance, led me to make sure that the curriculum that is being developed, that it was submitted by then Assemblymember Luis Alejo to create that curriculum, to make sure that that knowledge that has been produced in the last 50 years of research since ethnic studies was created back in 1968 as a discipline would be included in the curriculum in high schools, so that we as a state and hopefully as a nation can begin to know more about each other. The second question is, why is it important to combat racism in schools? Well, as you probably know, the schools get the task to do many of societal issues, to take on those challenges that are issues in society. And so whether it is, drug education, sex education, it many times falls upon the schools, because it is in the public schools where young people first form their ideas, learn more about other people, and the lack of ethnic studies is also sends a strong message. And I think the lack of having ourselves reflected in the curriculum sends a message to students, to young people, that their histories, that their cultures are not as valued as other people's histories and cultures. So that is why I very much applaud the efforts of this group and the groups that you represent in making sure that we change that in education. And as the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota a few months back, and then how young people took to the streets with the Black Lives Matter protest has made it even more important at this moment. And that is why I'm very happy that AB 331 is going to be taken up by the Senate this week, and it will be then sent to the governor. And it is my expectation that the governor will sign that, this legislation. How will the model curriculum be decided? And as Maya alluded, it is the responsibility of the Department of Education. The Department of Education and the Instructional Quality Commission, and then lastly, on the State Board of Education to develop, take input, and then finally adopt. After it goes through that process to adopt the model curriculum, which will be a guide for school districts to do their programs in ethnic studies. So the last question is, besides specific ethnic studies courses, what high school courses could fulfill the ethnic studies requirement? And that's a very good question. And our bill, AB 331, tries to be flexible. It allows for programs in school districts that have programs already in place, similar to the courses that I taught myself at Riverside Unified, whether they be in Chicano studies or African American studies or Asian American studies or Native American studies, as long as they fulfill the A through G requirement, those programs could stay in place. And we also want to see flexibility and creativity. So as Jasmine talked about language classes or literature classes, we could envision a class in ethnic literature or a class in Chicano literature or Asian American literature that would also fulfill the requirement for ethnic studies. So there is flexibility, there is room for creativity, and certainly there is a lot of room for your input, for student input, and for student also, to do the work that you're doing, to advocate so that your voices are heard, because it is, for young people that we are writing this curriculum, and so it is important that your voices be heard and included. And I'll stop there, and I don't know if there's any time or room at any point for questions, but thank you, Alvin, for having me here.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Medina, for sharing that piece of history and answering those questions. Now, we'll now be moving on to student voice and personal narratives, where all of the student leaders from across California's education system gathered here today are going to share a bit more about their personal narratives and thoughts on AB 331 as well. So without further ado, we'll start taking it away, and we'll start off with Arlene Campa. So Arlene, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Arlene Campa. I'm an activist, an artist, and a senior at the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts in East Los Angeles. So I'll start with a little story. In 8th grade, I had a very opinionated American history teacher and, quite frankly, a biased textbook. We got to a chapter called Mexican Contributions in the United States, and it was 2 pages long. while in comparison, the Revolutionary War took up about a fourth of the textbook's material. My teacher told the class, "We're skipping this chapter because it's not important." And I was like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And she said, "There's no important material in here that's pertinent to American history." So that was the moment that I realized I would have to advocate for my history and that my history was worth being glanced at in history class. So I told her, "Well, let me change your mind." And she allowed me to give a presentation to the class about the contributions of Latinx people and what they had contributed to America. So ethnic studies for me is the opportunity to be seen and to be heard without having to insist I'm worthy and that my history is worthy of people's time at 13. Ethnic studies to me is no more racial battle fatigue from having to keep asserting that we're worthy of being noted in history. I believe it is imperative to our campuses, to the well-being of our students of color, and to society that we are representing all students, especially in our history classes. And ethnic studies and passing AB 331 is a step towards that representation.
Thank you so much, Arlene, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Zachary Patterson. You can take it away.
Thank you, Alvin. Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Patterson, and I am the student member of San Diego Unified School District. In my school district, I represent over 100,000 students. Students of diverse backgrounds that deserve to be represented in an education system that is supposed to represent them and serve them. The conversation of ethnic studies started in my school district a few years ago. Administrators, students, and teachers recognized that we needed to change the environment of our school system to one that empowers all students and accurately portrays the contributions and struggles of the many different ethnic groups that make up our school district. I'm proud to say that a few weeks ago, the entire Board of Education, including myself, approved over 20 different ethnic studies programs in order to more effectively represent students. In my school district, starting this year, our incoming freshman class will be required to take a one-semester ethnic studies course, and it will be integrated into some of the courses we are already offering. We're working to change our history, and also exciting, students in San Diego Unified will now be able to take 4 years of ethnic studies for their history. So every single class they take is not going to be focused on Eurocentrism. It's going to be focused on an ethnic perspective and recognize the importance of seeing all perspectives. The Eurocentric ideas that have dominated our curriculum for so long do not represent the ideas of our state. And AB 331 is a requirement that will truly educate all students to feel empowered and represented, as well as create more empathetic students. Personally, as a Jewish American, I have always recognized the importance of teaching diversity in our history and recognizing the collective struggles that many of us have faced. On a personal level, events of anti-Semitism, including the recent shooting in my own city at the Chabad of Poway, and more recently, yesterday actually, on an LA freeway, a giant sign that said Jews are working to create a race war. All of these have only affirmed my ideas that there's a need for a deeper understanding of the struggles faced. And beyond my own experiences, this is something that is faced especially and so critically in our students of color, including Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, Arab American students. They deserve representation. We all deserve to feel represented in the curriculum that we learn. Ethnic studies should not be controversial. Ethnic studies is a basic expectation. I look forward to the passage of AB 331, and I look forward to the continued discussion so we can create an inclusive model curriculum that represents everyone from Jewish American students to Arab American students to everyone in between.
Thank you so much, Zach, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Francis Review. Francis, you can go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Francis Wavillo, and I'm the student board member from Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the largest school district in the state of California. I represent over 600,000 students. So I moved to the United States at 9 years old in 2010 with an accent and everything from the Philippines. And when people found that out, they asked me where that was. And when I got to world history in high school, my beautiful home island was mentioned once, and it was only to say that it was one of the lands that the US colonized. And I saw that that's how it was for most cultures. We're only mentioned when we fit in the puzzle that completes the US Eurocentric history. The US prides itself in having many ethnic and cultural minorities, but rarely do anything to support us. Representation is so important. Minority groups are excited when there's representation in media in a 2-hour-long movie, even if it's just a 30-second cameo. They feel seen. Now imagine the validation that students would feel if they saw people that looked like them and people that they identify with in their textbooks. An equitable public school education cannot be achieved without representation. AB 331 is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, so much for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Zaid. Zaid, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zaid Fatah. My pronouns are he, his, him. I'm a senior at Monte Vista High School this year and am one of the 3 finalists for the student board member position on the State Board of Education for the upcoming school year. And this bill is something that I think is incredibly important for us to focus on, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a period in which we're all going through so much change as a state. And I hope that we emerge from this pandemic, not just better, more like understanding of technology, but more understanding of each other through the passage of curriculums, such as like the ethnic studies curriculum, AB 331. We're a diverse state with diverse narratives. And when we can see ourselves represented in the curriculum we're learning, it brings learning to life. And this isn't something that's subjective. But upon conducting more research on AB 331 back in November and January while making proposals to the State Board of Education and the Senate and Assembly Committees on Education as part of the California Association on Student Councils, I came across a study that I thought was especially interesting. The Stanford Center for Educational Policy Analysis conducted a research study entitled The Causal Effects of Cultural Relevance, Evidence from an Ethnic Studies Curriculum, in which they conducted a study where they piloted an ethnic studies curriculum in several San Francisco high schools, and their results indicated that assignment to this course increased 9th grade student attendance by 21 percentage points, GPA by 1.4 grade points, and credits earned by 23. Personally, when I had a dose of ethnic studies in my world history class during my sophomore year, I felt like my Iraqi American narrative was represented and could be used to combat media stereotypes. And for all these reasons, I truly cannot wait for AB 331 to be passed.
Thank you so much for sharing, Zaid. We'll now be moving on to Joshua.
Thank you, Alvin. Hello, my name is Joshua Camarillo, and I attend Fresno Unified as a senior. This past year, I sat as a student board member, and I currently sit on the board of directors for GENup. I have good news. Fresno Unified made ethnic studies a graduation requirement. However, our work is not done. Over the summer, there was multiple disturbing incidences within America. I reflected and sought to further educate myself on the inequities that our communities face and ways to combat it. I learned that there is one tool that can be used to understand and combat racism. That tool is to listen. Listening is so powerful because it allows you to gain perspective of the struggles and injustices that another group has faced. Before you can take action, you must listen. This bill is important because it would make ethnic studies a requirement. Ethnic studies directly combats racism and informs our youth of different cultures within our society. It gives students the opportunity to listen. Before our youth move on to become members of our society and adults, they need to understand our society and the complexities that are within it. How can our youth be productive if they don't understand different cultures? How can we expect our youth to become doctors, lawyers, or politicians if they don't have an understanding of different cultures? The inclusivity of ethnic studies will directly combat ignorance and racism. Ethnic studies for me is crucial for our generation to enact change within our society. That is why I believe that AB 331 needs to be passed so that our generation can be filled with educated, culturally competent, and individuals who listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Jessica. I'm sorry, I think Jessica might be having some Wi-Fi difficulties. I believe she was kicked out of the meeting. No worries, we'll be moving on to the next student, Siobhan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Siobhan Hines Foster, and I'm the student delegate to the Board of Education at San Francisco. But before all of that, I'm a student at Lowell High School, where the Black population is under 1.4%. This means I'm rarely represented unless I create that representation. Ethnic studies is important to me because learning about other cultures builds community. Culture affects our society and how it functions in many ways, from art, fashion, and music, politics, and more. Taking ethnic studies will also train you to be socially affluent when getting to know people outside your culture.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Hema.
Hey everyone, my name is Hema Quetzal. I'm from East Oakland and I'm a community organizer from here. And I'm also the former state student board member from the year 2018-2019. And ethnic studies matters to me because ethnic studies is more than just learning the histories of our own people and the other and non-Eurocentric focused histories. It's about creating organizers. It's about creating activists. It's about asking the questions and challenging systems of oppression in your everyday life. Ethnic studies gives an opportunity for our young people to become active members in our community because when they see the injustices in the history book and then they see how it's still here today, then young people are going to want to mobilize. And so when we're teaching our young people to mobilize, we're activating new leaders and we're activating people to organize not only for inequitable education systems, but organize against police brutality, organize against anti-Blackness, organize against different systems of oppression. And we all need to push for that. There's a narrative that ethnic studies shouldn't be to create organizers, but they should. Ethnic studies needs to create organizers for it to be ethnic studies because it's a part of racial justice. This movement is a part of racial justice. It's about liberation. And I really want to mention that. And ethnic studies is not ethnic studies if it does not include Central American studies, if it does not include Palestinian studies, if it does not include communities that have been erased within other communities of color. And I say that because the movement isn't over. And in November, as Other has mentioned, there is a curriculum that is up. And we need to make sure that those stories are in that curriculum because there's always someone against ethnic studies. But that's why we're here. We're here to tell people to mobilize.
Thank you so much, Hema, for sharing. We'll now be going back to Jessica, who just rejoined.
Hello, y'all. My name is Jessica, and I am the Western Director for March for Our Lives and the Director of External Affairs for GENup. As we all know, racial justice has become the epicenter of a variety of movements currently happening right now. Race is a social construct that was used to divide groups into different categories, whether it being one's skin color, personality traits, physical characteristics, etc. As an ethnic studies undergrad student, I understand the historical precedence that it carries. Having started in San Francisco State in March 1969, ethnic studies has become a foundation and a source for communities to feel like their history is being told. Ethnic studies carries meanings of tolerance, acceptance, culture, and unity. It is a way for us to understand one another. That's where we all come in. In order to improve racial and social justice, AB331 would be a first step onto a more inclusive and accepting society.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Yasmin.
Hey everyone, my name's Yasmin Maybeen, and I'm the co-state director for March for Lives California, a youth gun violence prevention organization. I'm extremely excited to be here, and our organization is truly excited to be collaborating with all of you guys in support of AB331. This bill is extremely important to me personally because going to public school, I know what it's like to be given a very Eurocentric heavy curriculum and the effects that has on the student population. At my high school, the only advanced AP honors courses were on European history and culture, European music, or European literature. And so students like myself grew up thinking that their culture or their background is less than because it's not worth even an elective at their school. Working in gun violence prevention, this bill is also essential because fighting gun violence at its root comes down to building safer communities. Whether it's police violence, hate crimes, or state-sanctioned violence, we're less safe when we're afraid of our differences. And how can schools be expected to combat this when we don't even learn about them? So I'm truly excited for this bill and to be part of the efforts to get AB331 passed. And I'm truly excited for the next generation of high school students to finally see themselves in their curriculum and know that their history is all of our history.
Thank you so much for sharing, Yasmin. We'll now be moving on to Michelle.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Alas. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella. I am a senior at Northgate High School in Walnut Creek, California. I'm also one of 3 finalists to serve as a student member on the California State Board of Education, along with Zaid and Arlene. I am incredibly honored to be surrounded by so many prominent student leaders and would like to strongly express my support for AB 331. I'm very excited to help champion ethnic studies in California. Ever since that first student strike for ethnic studies at San Francisco State University 51 years ago, California has begun moving the needle on implementing a required course for ethnic studies in higher education. Now we finally have the opportunity to implement that at the secondary school level. My family and I immigrated here from El Salvador when I was 22 months old to rent a small apartment with a single bedroom. My parents chose our neighborhood strategically. They knew of the great reputation of schools in the Bay Area, despite the lack of affordable housing. We moved countries specifically for my education and later for my younger sister's education. I live in a largely homogenous white community where my education is saturated with Eurocentric narratives, as is the education of my 10-year-old sister. I had never seen myself represented in history textbooks, in independent reading books, in documentaries before I entered high school. I was fortunate enough that my junior year of high school, my AP literature teacher devoted the first semester to only reading Black authors. I devoured books by Zora Neale Hurston, Ralph Ellison, and Toni Morrison. My class of 20-something students analyzed and discussed these great works of literature, yet the rest of my school was not able to enjoy this privilege. This was also largely due to an inability on the school's side to purchase class sets of these books. As the previous student speakers have said, when you see yourself represented in what you are learning, you're more likely to want to learn, to want to read that textbook or that literature book and study how your ancestors have contributed to the creation of the world as we know it. This is something extraordinary and would be a turning point in the education of millions of English language learners, low-income students, and unduplicated pupils. Having a required ethnic studies course would immerse all California students in the histories of minority ethnic groups without framing our history by white narratives. This is the reshaping of California's education for all 6.4 million students in our schools. As a finalist for the state student board member position and a social justice advocate in my own community, I am proud to be part of a group of students so involved in tangible education policy reform and the historic restructuring of our history.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Maya from March for Our Lives.
Hi, my name's Maya, and I am the co-California State Director of March for Our Lives, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. But I'm also a Middle Eastern high school student, so I can say both on a professional and personal level, I fully endorse this bill. When I was growing up, and even now that I'm in high school, I was never taught ethnic studies. My schools always tended to focus on the Eurocentric curriculum that made people like me feel like we didn't fit in. People of color aren't being represented in those type of curriculums. But then after that, I started to distance myself from my ethnicity and culture because I was so tired of feeling like the odd man out. So that created a self-hatred for me, something I'm still fighting to this day, and it's a constant battle in my life. But on another level, we know that the lack of education doesn't just create self-hatred for BIPOC, but can it also create a lack of open-mindedness for other students as well. When we don't teach about ethnic studies, other kids don't understand that these cultures, these ethnicities are as important. And this lack of education can develop into racial bias and xenophobia. I see this on a daily basis at my high school, and it's absolutely appalling. And what this hatred can lead to is gun violence. We know that gun violence stems from hatred, from police brutality, from hate crimes. So if we want to fight it, the solution, at least one of the solutions, is education. That's why I support AB 331, and that's why March for Our Lives California is fully endorsing the bill.
Thank you so much, Maya, for sharing. We'll next be moving on to Winnie.
Hey everyone, my name is Winnie, and I'm an activist and GENup statewide political director. It's really been an honor to listen to all of my fellow student leaders and their personal stories. So ethnic studies is the history of us, the real history from all perspectives and cultures from all of our people. Ethnic studies does more than just provide hindsight on our US history and society. We're in such an increasingly globalized world, and ethnic studies provides these analytical tools that transfer across different cultures, regions, and vastly different human experiences. So when we look at these different roles played by race, ethnicity, class, gender, and sexual orientation in American society, ethnic studies provides a critical lens to examine and contextualize what is happening right now and why it is happening. And just this past week, we look at Lori Laughlin's case, an affluent white woman who was sentenced to only 2 months of prison for paying bribes to get her daughters into USC. And then we look at Tanya McDowell, an African-American woman sentenced to 5 years of prison for using the false address to get her child into a neighboring elementary school. With ethnic studies, we would understand the systemic racism that the criminal justice system is built on. And with AB331, we are equipped with the tools to navigate the reform that is needed. AB331 would mean that our students will be leaving schools as informed citizens and open-minded, empathetic, and educated individuals. And this is important to me and is distinguished from other academic disciplines because it means a commitment to social change. As an Asian American, ethnic studies brings me perspective about my first-generation immigrant parents, and it helps me understand their harmful and deep-rooted biases. Educating myself on historical events such as the war on drugs or Clinton's 3-strike law that is what keeps me grounded and calm when I speak out about issues such as mass incarceration and the school-to-prison pipeline, and researching about the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 that was created to counter the civil rights movements is what keeps us and me committed to social change and activism. So that's why I fully support AB 331, because it would provide students with the tools to understand how our country emerged from all different perspectives, and it gives us the knowledge to unravel and reform the messy reality that we currently live in.
Thank you, Winnie, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Maya.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Maya Howard. I use she, her pronouns. And as I said earlier, I'm the student member for the Instructional Quality Commission. And as I sat down to think about how I wanted to answer this question of why ethnic studies matters to me, I came to a really important conclusion of what I wanted to share with you all today, which is that the implementation of ethnic studies curriculum affects me in a very different way than it affects students of color. For me and for students who look like me, this inclusive curriculum is the difference between ignorance and awareness. But for students of color, this curriculum is the difference between an education that makes them feel heard and feel seen versus an education system that grooms its students to perpetuate the systemic and institutional racism that exists in this country and in this state. Throughout my time in school, I was aware that we generally had Eurocentric lessons and textbooks, but I always saw people who looked like me in the material, so the lack of representation of people of color never came as a slap in the face, as it did for so many students of color, which is exactly what we heard from so many of the students today. Jasmine, Arlene, Francis, Zaid, Siobhan, Yasmin, Michelle, Maya, and Winnie all mentioned this, which just highlights the problem more. And this is a problem in and of itself, because the fact that I was able to move through my classes with comfort and not having to confront topics that were foreign to me or confront difficult topics such as race relations in America, while a large portion of my peers were and are actually experiencing the subjects that our curriculum has avoided, only highlights the disproportionate burden that is placed on the shoulders of California's Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous, and Arab youth. Education is a tool. It doesn't just teach us what to think, but it teaches us how to think. When we are taught primarily about white people, we are taught that white is the main character and that all other races are just side characters. This is not only inaccurate, it is dangerous. It raises children with biases that favor white stories, fueling the racist narratives that we are already surrounded by. We can't rely on outside sources to ensure that kids are socially aware. That's the purpose of an education system. And an education system that tells an incomplete version of history and that caters only to white students is an education system that's failing. And that's why I think that ethnic studies is important.
Thank you so much, Maya, for sharing. We'll now be moving on to Assemblymember Medina.
Well, it has really been a pleasure to be here in this town hall discussion with all of you student leaders throughout the state of California. And it reminds me as to why I loved the work I did in the classroom so much, because it's invigorating for me to be in your presence. And I just want to thank all of you for very understanding so well why ethnic studies and the inclusion of the different groups that make up this nation and this state is so important. And I think that moving forward, it is important that your voices today get shared throughout the state of California, because there is no one in Sacramento, not me, not Dr. Weber, not other legislators, who can say it better than you have said it today. So again, just thank you for having me with you this morning.
Thank you so much for sharing, Assemblymember Medina. We'll now be moving on to the open discussion facet, where everyone will be encouraged to participate and share their thoughts after our guiding questions are presented. So Genevieve will take it from here and share a bit more about the process as well as the guiding discussions to kick it off.
Hi everyone, my name is Genevieve. I'm the GENup Chief of Staff, and I'm very excited to be moderating this discussion. So we have a few guiding questions that were submitted on our RSVP form. And since we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, if everybody watching at home would like to put in questions in our YouTube live chat, if we have time to get to them, we'll try to address some of those as well. So our first question, it's a little bit redundant, and Assemblymember Medina has already touched on it, as well as a lot of you, but I'd love it if you could address this in more detail. Why is it important to combat racism in the classroom?
I'm not sure who that question is addressed to, but I would defer it to one of the students, if that's all right.
Michelle?
Yeah, just to touch on this question, kudos to whoever submitted it. But I have kind of a similar story to Arlene, in that in 8th grade, I didn't learn about Mexican American history because we quote unquote lived in California, and for some reason that would be a justification for not learning about Mexican American history, and that, in my opinion, is racism at its peak. It's ignoring the history of Central American peoples, of Latinx peoples, and largely not wanting to address histories that have shaped California, that have shaped the United States as we know it. And that was problematic for me. It was problematic for many students. I believe I was the only Latinx students in that class at the time, but having an ethnic studies course would actively combat racism, that sort of racism where your history is just simply ignored.
Thank you, Michelle. Jessica, do you want to go ahead?
I guess this also goes based on the personal story. Well, in 2016, it goes into how when Donald Trump was still running, he came to Orange County to be able to do like a little thing in regards to his speech and everything. But point of it is that like it was right across from like the community college that I was attending. So we saw a variety of students be able to go there. And I think like when we saw that, it was such like an eye opener, and being able to see how a lot of your classmates and a lot of people that were sitting like literally right next to you in many classes were so hateful and so disrespectful, and just like had so many negative things to say, that it kind of like really hurt, because like some of these people were like not only just people that you might have considered friends, but it was also people that like you shared many things with. So like being able to see that and see so much hate going on within like an individual city really goes to stem how important it is for people to be understanding of the different cultures and being able to understand like what happens around them, because people speak from ignorance and from intolerance, and a lot of that could be, at least a lot could be understood if people were more educated on like why like specific cultures do things the way that they do, why things happen the way that they happen, because it's like we are not told the true history of like this country and how people came to be. So I think by being able to add that, it's like we will just become more accepting of one another and be able to find a way where we could all be more tolerant and just more understanding of like the history of our natures and why we act the way that we act.
Awesome. Next, we'll have Arlene.
So nobody is born racist. nobody's born ignorant. Nobody comes straight out of the womb and is like, I have a bias against this person because they just come out of the womb. They haven't been susceptible to that information. So we're all learning things, whether that be in our household, in our environment, or in school. And if we are combating racism in the classroom, just think of the culture shift that we can create if we create these safe spaces where we can unlearn our biases, be receptive to other people's cultures, be receptive to change. I have a younger brother who, when he learns something really interesting in school, he'll come and he'll sit on my bed and he'll be like, I learned this thing, and then he's really excited to share it with me. So what if we have this culture shift where we're starting even as young as elementary school, middle school, where kids are coming home, they're talking to their family members, they're talking to their households, and then they go talk to their friends, and then their friends go talk to their households, and then we have a community change that then leads, to county change, that leads to state change and nation change. So it's a butterfly effect almost. So it's very important to start within the classroom, touch that one student, which then can lead us to eventually touching and changing the perceptions of all people across our nation and the world.
Thank you. Zane?
Yeah, so I guess if just to confirm, the question's asking why is it important for us to combat racism at our schools? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I can speak anecdotally from personal experience. Earlier this year, I serve on my school site council, and over the past few years in my school and my school district, we've been addressed with numerous incidents of people using hate speech and making racist remarks. But this past year, specifically in December, it actually got, as I think, worse than it's ever been in my school district. At our December site council meeting, an African-American mother came to us and she cried because her daughter was experiencing not just racist comments, but like actions in which people were going out of their way to make her daughter feel uncomfortable. For example, there was an instance in which some girls would not want to touch the door handle that her daughter touched because her daughter was a different color. And just instances like that are what make students not be able to learn to the full capacity that they can and that they should be able to learn. At the very least, people go to school to be able to learn. And if we don't provide them with a safe environment to be able to learn, then there's really no way that we can achieve our number one goal of going to school, which is to be able to learn. So that's why I think it's important to combat racism in schools.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to move on to our next question. How do you see ethnic studies reshaping the way students see education? Assemblymember Medina, would you like to touch on that first?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. As a teacher, and you've been in many classrooms, all of you, there's different ways of looking at education. Some folks look at education about pouring knowledge in to the person. And I think oftentimes, or too often, that's what happens in classes. And I think ethnic studies is the opposite of that. Ethnic studies makes the student the scholar. Ethnic studies makes the student the person to ask the questions of what is their own family story, what is their history, and then to make ties within those personal stories to the larger history of California or the larger history of the nation itself. And so no longer would students be outside, but be active participants. Some of you may have heard of Pablo Frey, and he wrote a book, The Pediology of the Oppressed. And I think that is a different way to look at education. It's more active learners. And ethnic studies certainly does that. Someone talked about ethnic studies making people community organizers, and the implicit role of activism in ethnic studies. And I think that is certainly there. In a few days, we're gonna be looking at the 50th anniversary of the Chicano moratorium, August 29th. And some of you have alluded to the events at San Francisco State in 1968. So ethnic studies only comes out of activism, is only there because of things like the San Francisco State strike, the walkouts in 1968 of Latino Chicano students in East LA. Certainly, those are very important. And it is a different form, I think, of education. And it certainly has a more buy-in from students. And it should be like this discussion right now, students being able to share their own experiences, own thoughts, and like a student who had the opportunity to read Black literature, to see how those stories, those narratives of you, as you have said, fit into education. It's exciting.
Thank you very much. Can we have Siobhan go?
So hi, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about having to create lanes of representation. So as I said, I attend Lowell High School, which the Black population is 1.4%. So over this year, I had to create with my BSU our own Black History Month assembly, because if we didn't do it, who else would? Every year, our students look forward to seeing and learning more about Black culture. So I can only imagine how big ethnic studies would be to them. Every year, we showcase Black culture in art, also fashion, music, and dance.
Thank you. Zachary?
Yeah, definitely. So I just think about when I was in 4th grade and we began talking about the California mission system and just the complete falsities that I ended up learning from that curriculum and how inaccurate it was. It was, yes, it was one part of our California history, but the idea that it's so glorified now, and that, I mean, everybody, I look across San Diego and the name Sarah from Father Sarah is plastered all across San Diego County. And what I think we forget in studying that is it had an awful, inhumane effect on our indigenous population. And that needs to be recognized. If you look at our textbooks, you see one page on the effects of the effects that it had on our Native American population. And the idea that this curriculum wasn't just, it didn't just come and go, it had a really strong and really negative effect. And that needs to be taught in its entirety. You can teach the mission system, but if you want to teach that, you have to teach it properly. And you have to teach it to where it represents all people. And I think this reshaping of the education system, talking about that, is really where students are going to be seeing a new perspective. And students are going to see a perspective that should have been represented so many years ago, but we failed as a society to get there. And while this doesn't right the wrongs of history at all, I think it slowly gets to the point to where we can recognize what has happened and we can work to empower and work to repair the disconnect that we've created throughout our history. And I just want to add that a lot of us who are student board members on this call, I think it's amazing to see that the existence of student board members in the state of California really came out from this student activism in the late 60s and talking about those walkouts in East LA. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of us being able to represent students today comes from the activism of those in the past that put their foot down in regards to the racial injustice. So a lot of our existence and our representation comes from these basic movements. And if we can recognize where we've come to represent our students and how we've done that, I think this ethnic studies program can really create massive change in our education system.
Thank you, Zachary. Maya, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to add on to what I talked about earlier, which is the idea that education doesn't just teach us what to think, it teaches us how to think. And I think that the core idea behind that is that we're young and our brains are kind of malleable. And so when we're learning curriculum, it's not just feeding us facts that we can then spit out about history or about literature or whatever that might be. It's teaching us our worldview. It's teaching us how we're going to approach the world around us, how we're going to approach our communities, how we're going to approach the people that we meet. And so when we get these whitewashed versions of history and whitewashed versions of literature and just whitewashed versions of culture. Because when we learn about culture in our schools and about big events throughout history, we're learning about white events and we're not learning about the cultural revolutions of various other ethnic groups. It teaches us the biases that already exist in the world outside of school. And so rather than combating those biases, it's only furthering those biases. And so I think that by creating a curriculum that's going to reteach us how to think and give students the opportunity to examine their own biases and then come out the other side and graduate high school with a more complete version of what the world looks like is going to make a really big difference in those people being able to go out into the world and then make a difference in combating the biases, whether that be in the medical field or in politics, or they want to write their own literature. It's going to go and affect every field that those students go into. So by implementing ethnic studies, we're drastically changing the lives of the next generation and therefore the generations after them. So that's how I see ethnic studies changing our education system.
Thanks, Maya. Yasmin, can you go ahead?
Yeah, kind of similar to what Zachary was saying. I think ethnic studies is also important, not just because we're getting that education, but also because it's countering the false education that we've been given. And I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of take back our narrative and share it what it really is. Because I know even when different cultures and different backgrounds do get talked about in school, it's not talked about in a way that's actually constructive. And you can see that in how they talk about Indigenous people, how they talk about Native American people, the way they framed colonialism, the way they framed kind of justified violence that Americans did versus how they demonized it towards other countries. And you kind of see that those same talking points that are replicated even now and how people are reacting to the uprisings because they have this false idea of how civil rights became in this country. So I think with ethnic studies, it's not only allowing different cultures to be talked about, but it's also allowing us to sort of counter the narratives that were already given to us.
Awesome, thank you. Jessica, go ahead.
Something else that I think is very important to keep in mind is that for the ethnic studies and the different classes that are to be taken, I think it should be representative of the teachers are teaching you should be representative of those cultures. So it is important for if I don't know, for example, you were to be teaching a Chicano class, to be able to have a Chicanx professor to be able to teach you the proper history, because oftentimes we have in our classes, we have for example, a white professor that's teaching us about the historical struggles that happen in I don't know, in Mexico or the indigenous communities here of this country. It's what better way than actually having someone that is part of that community be able to actually teach you that history. I think oftentimes we forget about that because in our education, we don't see a lot of people that look like us, whether it comes through the ethnic studies curriculum towards administration, towards in general, people in general. So it makes it so easy for students not to feel like you're kind of being supported because you don't see teachers that look like you don't see administration that looks like you. So it makes it so much harder to be able to try to be understanding and get a deeper grasp of what is being taught to you. So I think by being able ethnic studies brings in that, but at the same time within once that is brought, it is also important to be able to bring in the people that are representative of those communities that are being of that history that's being taught, because it will just make it more accepting and just for people to kind of get that struggle from people that have suffered through that same struggles, to be able to be more understanding and more inclusive of one another, because oftentimes that's the history that is not being taken care of. And we get people that don't understand of history be able to teach that to us, so it doesn't really leave much of an impact towards ourselves and our education, because our voices have gone silenced for way too long, that now it's important to be able to uplift those professors and teachers to be able to get that opportunity to teach the history of their own individual cultures.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing as well. Before we continue this discussion period, where we're going to be ending at 2:15, Assemblymember Medina does need to head off now, so he will be giving a quick closing statement. So go ahead and take it away, Assemblymember Medina.
Well, to Jessica's point of who the teachers are that stand in front of the classes, I think it is very important as well. And it is a pleasure for me to be able to meet with future teachers. I had a very diverse group of student teachers come to my office in Sacramento a while back. Very diverse, all excited about becoming teachers. And I think as we diversify the curriculum, we will also diversify who are the teachers in the state of California. And as you here in this group are graduates and will graduate, and you will have many opportunities in front of you to go into many, many different fields, all of them important, whether you go into law or medicine or journalism or engineering, all important. But the teachers, my life's work of teaching, of being a public school teacher, also very important. And so I would ask some of you to consider it, because I know, as Jessica said, how important all teachers are, but especially teachers of color, how important they are and how much influence they can have on people's lives. So I, again, thank you for letting me be here with you this morning. Keep up the good work. We are, with your help, going to get AB 331 passed. And with your help, we'll have the governor sign it. And I like what you said. It's only the beginning, because there is much change that needs to happen in education. And I am sure that with young people like you, we can make that change happen. So thank you all for having me here. Good luck and in all the work and endeavors that you do. And look forward to your efforts to making sure that we get this AB 331 signed by the governor. I look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Medina. We should all give him a big round of applause for authoring this bill and championing this. So this is very exciting.
Thank you. Good to have you here. Good to have you working together. Thanks.
Thank you. Genevieve, would you like to take it back to the discussion?
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to move on to our next question, which is, what are some next steps students can take to create a more equitable school environment? Maya, go ahead. Maya.
Yeah, hi. So I see this a lot in my daily high school. I see that there is racial biases growing, and a lot of the time it does stem from lack of education. So I think when it comes to this question, what students need to do is they need to bring the curriculum that they're going to be learning if we do pass ethnic studies throughout California into like talking to their friends about it. People need to talk about this curriculum more and more, because what I've been noticing is like when students are studying for a test for like any high school history class, the curriculum that they're studying for is always a Eurocentric narrative. But if we get students studying and learning more about different cultures and ethnicities, they're going to bring that information into their daily lives and they're going to share it with people. And then that in turn can create more cultured, open-minded citizens, which, as I stated before, can and is proven to decrease the amount of violence that people of color have been facing in this country. So if we focus on this, and if students bring the curriculum that they're going to be teaching into their communities and talking to their parents, their siblings, their friends about it, then I believe that we can create more open-mindedness in our communities.
Thank you, Maya. Francis, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so in theory, this is actually really easy, but a lot of people tend to struggle with it. And I think a lot of students need to learn how to be kind to each other, how to be decent to one another. And it starts with listening to minority groups, listening to what it is that they're asking for, and using your privilege and your platform to call to action for those things. And it really is so easy to just listen to what it is that everyone's telling you. You know, like minority students are telling you, we need your help. We want to be represented. We want you guys to listen to us. It's not that difficult to stand by them. You can't just label yourself as an ally, but then silence them when they try to speak, not uplift their voices and try to speak over them whenever they try to tell you what it is that they want to say. So again, it's really easy in theory, but in practice, a lot of people seem to not understand how easy it is to be kind and to be decent to one another and to actually help and uplift voices from minority communities, whether that be ethnic minorities or the LGBTQ plus community. So students can just take a step back and check where it is that they stand with their privilege and how they can use that said privilege to help other people out.
Thank you, Francis. Hema, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Some of the things that you can do to create a more equitable school environment is challenging your teachers and your educators. I feel like as young people, sometimes it can be scary to debate or like tell your teachers what they're teaching is erasure or like oppressive, but we have to start doing that as young people. We can't be afraid to call those people out because at the end of the day, these are the folks who are going to be interacting with young people for years to come. And so challenge your educators to if their history class it has no anti-racist text, then challenge your history teacher to be like, hey, why are we not learning about this? Or if they're using language that shouldn't be used, call them out, be like, you shouldn't be using that language. And I feel like that really creates a better school environment because for oftentimes a lot of these educators, they don't want to talk about race. They don't. I know this because I was also on my local school board, and I heard the stories. Sorry, you're gonna hear my little siblings. Um, on the local school board, I heard stories about this, and especially like white students. If you go to a primarily white school, trust me, you're gonna have to be the ones to call out your white teachers because you have that privilege. People are gonna listen to you, whether it's right or wrong. They're just gonna listen to you more. So you need to guess what, leverage that privilege and call people out. And also call out your school board members. Why haven't they implemented this? In Oakland, it's implemented. So your local school districts should be doing this already.
Thank you. Yasmin, can you go next?
Yeah, I would also add that it's also the administration's responsibility to be promoting diverse literature and narratives and curriculums, even within like elementary and middle school. Like within high school is amazing, but honestly, like if high school is your first time learning about a different culture, like that's too late. Like people are like a lot of times people don't want to talk about difficult issues about race and racism to really young kids, but the thing is kids do show these biases already. There are lots of kids who already have a lot of racial biases and who are bullying and being rude to other students because of their background, because of the color of their skin. So waiting until high school, while it's important to make that a requirement, that should not be people's first exposure. And that should be something that the administration should also be taking upon themselves within elementary school, within middle school, to also have these narratives within their curriculum already.
Thank you. Maya, do you want to go?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that I want to touch on really quickly. The first being, I think that there really needs to be a narrative shift in terms of right now, what it looks like is white history is the main subject in terms of like when we take a history class, that's going to be white history. And we see ethnic studies or studies of various other ethnicities as an extracurricular. And I think that's really a problem because that makes it seem like white history is the most important history and that it's the one that's like the primary thing that's happened throughout time, which is just wildly inaccurate. And so while I think it's great to have ethnic studies as an additional class, also intertwining those issues into history classes to make sure that people don't grow up with the idea that white history is the most important history. I think that that's really important in the same way that like a lot of times the only times we hear about racism is civil rights and slavery, or the only time we hear about anti-Semitism is with the Holocaust. Making sure that curriculum is put in place that shows that these issues aren't over. They didn't end when Civil Rights Act was passed. They didn't end when the Holocaust ended. Making sure that those histories, recent history of anti-Semitism, recent history of anti-Black racism, recent history of anti-Indigenous racism, that these histories continue And as Yasmin just talked about, like the early childhood education, I think that that's such an important step for all of this, because while I talked about how our brains are malleable in high school, that's even more true in elementary school and in middle school, because by high school, yes, we can still change, but the biases are already there. And I think that ethnic studies in high school can make a difference, but putting it in early childhood education makes the biggest difference, because that's when kids are really, really developing their worldview and deciding what they're going to see the world as and how they're going to treat other people for the rest of their lives. And so implementing that in early childhood education, I think, is an essential step in continuing and moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. Michelle, go ahead.
I want to commend all of my peers for saying all these wonderful truths. And also I want to add that we can't pioneer for racial justice without seeing the intersectionality of legislation and social justice. We right now have some really important propositions on our ballot coming up in November. So if students are old enough, one thing that they can do to actively combat injustice and racism is to vote for these propositions. For example, Proposition 15, which would take commercial and industrial property taxes and funnel it back into schools and communities with a revenue of approximately $8 billion. So that goes directly into communities in need. California is 39th in per pupil spending, and this proposition would just be a turning point for so many students, unduplicated pupils, low-income students, English language learners. Furthermore, Proposition 16, which is for affirmative action, that would help so many students get into higher education. These two propositions are examples of ways that students, if they can, actively go out and vote, and your vote, your yes, does combat racial equity and does pass legislation that addresses these issues.
Thank you so much. Arlene, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, when we think about equity, we also need to think about access. We need to think about looking around who's on the Zoom and asking ourselves who's not here, and maybe why are they not here? Was it a lack of information, a lack of a platform, a lack of maybe the voice too? How can we give platform to English language learners? How can we give platform to students with special needs and disabilities? So when we're thinking about building this very equitable school community, we need to think about those that we are leaving out of the conversation and uplift their voices. Like Francis said, using your platform and your privilege to uplift those voices and give them this position and this platform to speak, to be empathetically kind and also an empathetic listener. You know, sometimes we listen so that we can say something back really fast, but how can we listen to digest and to process and to hold space in our bodies for these narratives that maybe aren't ours, but are just as important as our narratives. And I think the last thing is to be so kind and just to listen to each other. Toni Morrison said that erasure is as though a whole universe is being described in invisible ink. Sometimes it feels like our whole lives have been described in invisible ink, and we don't matter, or we aren't valued in our education system or even in our daily lives. So just taking that space and to listen and to be empathetic and to validate everybody's experience, because all of our different experiences with racism, with ethnic studies, vary. So we all are valuable and important. Everybody watching and everybody on this panel and every student in California is valuable and important.
Thank you, Arlene. Zachary, go ahead.
Thank you. Just some technical things. I think that school site councils and school site governance teams are amazing places to go for the school specific racism that we're facing. All of us have had our experiences on the campus specifically. And I think I think a great way that any student can get involved is serving on your school site council, as a bunch of you have, and serving on your SSGT, your school site governance team. I know my school district has a requirement where the majority can't be students, which is frustrating because it can really seem like outside groups are controlling the flow of conversation. But if students are there pushing the needle, it gets more and more difficult to oppose them. And I think just doing the simple act of just researching how to get on your SSC and checking your school district website and emailing your principal is an amazing step towards changing the attitude of school site staff. I find at the board level that my board likes to put together these great idealistic visions that aren't really implemented very well at the local level. They set a great tone, but there's a large disconnect between what the teachers actually teach and what the board wants the teachers to do. And I think that if we start at the school site level and create these really grassroots initiatives to change our own schools, this is going to dramatically change the school site level and eventually the entire state, I think.
Thank you so much, Zach. We're going to close off with one more question, and this is, what inspired you to become part of this fight against racism in our schools? Go for it, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. This is the last time I'm going to speak, but I just wanted to give a little anecdote. The summer after my sophomore year, I took an intro to sociology class at my local community college. And this was actually the first time that race was a key subject in all of our discussions. I really felt like a mouse in a den of lions. I was surrounded by university students. I was the youngest one in the class. But nonetheless, I knew that I had to pioneer each conversation with my conviction and my unique experiences as a Latinx student in the Bay Area. It was in this class that I actually watched a TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, a Nigerian author and a prominent speaker, and it was called The Danger of a Single Story. I don't know if any of you have watched it, but I highly recommend you to go watch it after this event. She talked about growing up reading books with blue-eyed protagonists and with blonde hair, and as a creative youth, she began writing from a young age, and the characters of her story were very westernized. They mirrored these characteristics that she had read growing up, and they played in the snow, and they ate apples. And I started thinking, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I did when I was younger. Whenever I wrote creative stories or whenever I had to write something for class, I never wrote about Latinx protagonists. I never wrote Latinx characters. I wrote about what I had been reading. And what I had been reading were students with white skin, blue hair, and golden locks. And when I had kind of this like eye-opening moment, really epiphany, I was like, this is something that I myself have internalized without even realizing it. And now it's up to me to actively try to dismantle that. And dismantling that starts at school, because learning starts at school. It starts from a young age, and it starts within our own communities, and it starts with ourselves. So that is really what has led me to pioneer ethnic studies, and why it is so important to me that I see myself and that all students see ourselves represented in what we're learning.
Thank you, Michelle. Siobhan, go ahead.
What inspired me was just my life as a whole. We're usually brought up with like this narrative that San Francisco is like this liberal city, and it's all like, you know, gumdrops, rainbows, and like unicorns, but that's not always the case. In first grade, I went to a school that had, again, you know, a really small Black population. And there was one time we had crazy hair day, and other students from other backgrounds wanted to wear their wigs. But when I asked my teacher if I could wear the wig, she said, no, your hair is too greasy. So me as a kid, I got a water bottle and I wanted to get the grease out my hair. So that really set me to a point to see where, you know, I'm different than the other students, and even my hair sets me apart. Also, moving forward to being in high school, Zach talked about, you know, joining school site councils and stuff like that. But even in these small elections, racism is deeply rooted. When I was running my campaign, even for like small stuff like student council, I was running to be the class body vice president. Many students stopped me in the hallway and said, you know, vote for the other candidates. They're better because they're Asian. Or I'll vote for you, but you probably won't win because you're Black. And even in my campaign as student delegate for the Board of Education, I experienced a lot of racism. Students created videos of me trying to depict myself as a racist, or put their racist ideals on photos of me, comparing me to gorillas. and chimpanzees and stuff like that. So there's a lot of issues that we face, and there's a lot of issues we face in San Francisco. And I feel like ethnic studies will definitely change this. But as allies and as students ourselves, we need to have these conversations. And if we don't have these conversations, we won't be able to educate ourselves.
Thank you. Hema, go ahead.
Yeah, some of the reasons I'm involved with like racial justice and like equity within schools is because like growing up in Oakland, there's like it's very evident what schools have what. You know, my school didn't have a janitor, but the school that was white will have a janitor, a counselor, and maybe no police officers, but there'll always be a police officer, a security guard in any school that is like majority Latinx, majority African American, Black. Like if you're, and so you know, when you grew up seeing all these things, it's very evident that something needs to change. Because it's just like, you're telling me I can't even walk in a bathroom and have soap and like clean toilets because you couldn't get me a janitor, but you'll always have a security guard. How does that make sense? And it was also an issue for me because what was really heartbreaking is that my mom was an organizer. When she came from to this country from El Salvador when she was 13, she was organizing already for against like the school to prison pipeline and fighting against opening new jails. And when growing up, she was fighting against gang injunctions, which would discriminate against Black and brown youth who may have been affiliated, telling them they couldn't even wear red. I couldn't even wear red in high school. I don't know how it is in some schools, but you're not allowed to wear certain colors. And so realizing that that's not normal in other communities that are white and rich, it was a huge problem. So that's why I got involved, and I had to start getting involved when I was 10 because they chose now to close 5 schools that were primarily BIPOC. And so, you know, it's not that I chose to get involved, it's more like I had to, because sometimes you don't have a choice but to organize in order for future generations to get what you didn't have. But yeah, like that's some of the reasons. And I really feel like everybody, we should all be on top of like education equity because this impacts everybody, whether you like it or not. And it's not normal to be discriminated. It's not okay to be discriminated against and not to have basic resources.
Thank you. Jessica, go ahead.
Hello once again. I think here I speak from two different perspectives. So one comes from like the activism realm, and then like learning from like past historical struggles that we have had to endure. Coming from a very low income community and a very low income city, oftentimes we were not. It was hard to kind of be able to depict how like your city looked versus other cities, because like obviously redlining is still a big issue that is oftentimes not discussed. Yeah, and like going to a high school where like you literally like when you did sports, having your sports clothes be more than 20 years old and your books completely crumbled and like literally sitting on the floor because there's no seats to actually sit in. Like a lot of it like really leaves an impact in your life in regards towards wanting better for your community and wanting better for your family, but also as someone that has literally lost a lot of family members to the school to prison pipeline, and then been able to like really come from very humble origins in regards towards a lot of individual struggles that my family has had to endure. That led me to wanting to contribute more and trying to give back towards my community. But I think a lot of it also learned a lot then from the educational realm, because I am an ethnic studies major with a concentration in Chicano studies. And I think when I first took my first class in school, I did not start as an ethnic studies major. I just started with one major, with political science, but I ended up doing a double major with both of them. Because like, even though sometimes we call ourselves allies to different movements, you truly don't understand much until you start taking the classes, start learning from educators who've been part of that struggle, who like, I had educators that were living in the 60s and were like going through a lot of oppression, be able to actually teach me, because the school I went to was the second school to develop an ethnic studies program in its college. So like we were so like our ethnic studies program is like was something that people truly fight for, and being able to see the passion and the motivation of having POC community members truly fight for that. And then being a sensory representation, I think that brought so much inner passion that I thought like I already had a lot of, but it really like made me feel more connected, not only towards my own community, but towards other communities. because we understood each other's struggles. We understood like the differences and the similarities that oftentimes we carry, but we don't discuss about. And I think it just made us more united as ethnic studies students to like kind of like be a supportive system towards one another when it comes towards like fighting the real world and issues that are currently happening on a national scale. So I think being able to see from both perspectives have really let an impact into my life, which has made me want to continue fighting for this and wanting to contribute not only towards now my family and my community, but also towards the ethnic studies educators who continue to fight this fight and been fighting this fight for more than 50 years. And like we still haven't reached the point where we wanted to reach back in the 60s. So I think it really goes into effect like how much we have had to surpass as a society and how much work is yet to still be done. But at the same time, it's like how much unity that could be able to bring amongst communities and how much unity and understanding it could be amongst people. So I think that really leaves an impact onto someone's life, which makes me like be like so excited and stoked towards anything that happens and how like I could be able to contribute in any capacity that I can.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, everybody. Beautifully spoken. You all are so inspiring. I'm sorry we didn't get to any of the live stream questions, but hopefully you all enjoyed this portion of our webinar. So I'm going to hand it over to Alvin, and he's going to talk about our next steps.
Yeah, so thank you everyone and all the wonderful student leaders that have gathered here today to really have a good conversation and discussion on AB331 and the need for ethnic studies in California. We're now going to be ending really soon, but before we end, we just want to give a quick kind of update on the timeline for everyone watching and just our next action items forward. As you guys know, the state Senate floor is going to be picking up their vote on AB331 starting between next Tuesday to the 31st, so they're going to be voting on it anytime within that time frame. We're cautiously optimistic that it should pass, as it already did pass the assembly floor. But to just to be sure, we're going to make sure GENup, Diversify Our Narrative, and March for Lives California, we really galvanize our members to really phone bank and email and call their local state senators as well to voice their support for the bill. So for everyone here watching today, if you haven't, make sure you go visit link.tree. Is that the link? Sorry, link.tree/ethnic, or sorry, linktr.ee/ethnic studies. And if you visit that toolkit, you'll be able to see a step-by-step guide on how to log calls and reach out and contact your local state senator about voicing your support for AB331. So for everyone here watching today, make sure you do that if you have not already. And as for next steps, if it gets through the Senate floor, we will be doing another big press conference with Assemblymember Medina's office on this bill as well. So we hope to see all the student leaders gathered here today participate in that press conference as well to really show the public the scope and the progress everyone has made on AB331, as well as the fight to get ethnic studies passed in California. So once again, thank you to all the student leaders for gathering here today and sharing their thoughts. Thank you guys for making it. Thank you to Assemblymember Medina, who's not here anymore, but again, for championing this bill and even really being the leader in really getting ethnic studies in California. And once again, thank you to all the folks that have tuned in to watch today and taking that self-initiative to learn more about AB331 and ethnic studies. And to conclude, I'll pass it on to Jasmine, one of the co-founders of Diversify Our Narrative, to give some closing remarks, and we will be done for the day.
Yeah, kind of just reiterating what Alvin said, thank you so much to everyone who's been able to tune in here, along with all of the student leaders who attended today. I really just want to express how important it is to be calling and emailing your senators. This is something that's going to be voted on very soon, as Alvin said, and your voice really does matter. They do take it to heart, especially when it's the youth that are speaking up and fighting. So that's all from my end, and thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And we're done for the day.